It's the best place to get away from everything. I think I just might live here permanently. Anyway, I hope you're all safe and well, and welcome to the 9th of July Health and Wellbeing Board meeting. Just a few, we're probably all getting very used to this now, but just some meeting protocols. If you can keep your microphone on mute, please, unless you're asked to speak by the chair. You can raise the hand function if you want to speak. If you want to address the board, you can also use the chat function, which is quite useful. This is being live streamed, not just yet, because if anybody does object to being recorded, I'm afraid the only option is to leave the meeting now. Sounds a bit harsh. I assume that you all want to stay, and if that's the case, then Cheryl, can you press record? So I think we're now live. Will you confirm that, Cheryl? So this is being broadcast on YouTube. We've got some apologies. Kathy Handley, Teresa Grant, Anna Enshaw, Sheriff Osman is joining. I'm not sure if a sheriff is on the chat yet. Nick Adderley, Chief Inspector Pete Basham is joining in replacement. Stephen Mould, apologies, so it's Nikki Mrazek. Councillor Fiona Baker, Paul White, Alison Gilbert joining instead. Russell Rolfe, Becky Thornton is joining as a replacement. Apologies still, Jonathan Ireland, Francis Shattuck, David Whiting, Darren Dovey, Sean Hallam is joining, and Krishni Waring, Maria Wogan is joining in her place. And David Jones will be joining at 10, but I can see him here already. Okay, well, welcome, David. Right,
join the meeting.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Okay, so we can move on then, please, to the second item on the agenda, which is the notification of requests for members of the public to address the meeting. There haven't been any, so let's move on to item 3, which is declarations of interest. If anybody has a declaration, please let us know now. There's a pause. Okay, that's great. We can move on then to item number 4, which is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 13th of May 2020. So just for board members, hopefully you've read through the minutes. Do we have any clarifications on those minutes? If not, we can agree the minutes as a factual record. Okay, you can use a thumbs up if you wish, or thank you. Yeah, that's good. There are some actions arising from that meeting on the 9th of January. The action log is in your pack. The first one, 47, this is myself to discuss administration for the Health and Wellbeing Forums with Lucy Whiteman. We're kind of wrapping this up. This will continue on, be a bigger piece, and we've got a meeting scheduled for the 22nd of July to take this on. So that's in progress. 51, Councillor Golby was to provide a presentation on development of the Children's Trust. I know Councillor Golby is with us. Perhaps you might be able to provide a bit of a briefing, Matt, on that in your section of the agenda coming up.
Yeah, sure, Nick.
Thank you. Lucy Whiteman, Peter Lynch and Cheryl Bird to review the joint NHCP Health and Wellbeing Board risk register. That's on hold due to COVID. The publication of the draft plan has been put on hold, and we will return to that as time permits. And 54, that's just to confirm that action was completed. This is a meeting to be arranged to discuss any unmet need within the county to enable more voluntary sector access to funding. So that's part of the COVID-19 recovery cell work. We can move on then. Item 6 is item 5, that was the action log. Item 6 under updates, board member updates. I've got a few, then I'll ask colleagues to comment on updates that are relevant to the agenda. Brief ones from me are changes to board membership. So following the creation of a senior leadership team at NGH and KGH, Alan Burns, who's the chairman, will be the board member representing both Northampton General and Kettering General Hospitals. Simon Weldon will be the deputy board member representing both trusts. Sheriff Osman replaces Sam Fitzgerald as Anna Earnshaw's deputy to the board. So welcome to Sheriff. And Alison Gilbert replaces Tim O'Donovan as the deputy member for NHCP. So welcome to Alison. Can I open it up then? Do we have any board member updates are relevant, exciting? David, I can see your hands there. Yes, please.
Just quickly, our annual report has been distributed and I think will be an agenda item at a future meeting. So just draw attention to that. And secondly, we're continuing to do our COVID survey and we'll have further updates on that. It's not for now, but to keep people informed of public reactions. And thirdly, at our board meeting yesterday, we did reflect on equalities issues in the light of recent national and international events. And agreed it was important that we work together to engage with minority communities around the county and to review our work in that area. I hope that all agencies are doing the same. Northamptonshire doesn't have a brilliant record in this area, so it's important that we do focus particularly on that, and we'll come back to that issue later on. Those are my updates. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, David. Anybody else? I've got a brief one here from which will be of interest to health practitioners. Some of you will know that the university runs a competency test centre. It's called the CTC. You may have seen it by the Innovation Centre near the train station in Northampton. That's been shut since end of March, but it's reopening on July the 20th. There are something like 2,000 plus health practitioners, nurses on a temporary CV19 register, which means they're actually not technically pass the test to practice in the UK. They're from outside the EU, but they would just rush straight to the front line. So those people will be tested over the coming months. There's at least 2,000 of them. And so we're one of 3 national centres. The other one is in Oxford. The other is in Ulster. So they're going to be quite busy over the coming months, but it's good that that's reopened on July the 20th. So I'm sure you'll wish that well. If that is it from board member updates, we can move on to item 7, which is Northamptonshire Health and Care Partnership update, a report.
Sorry, Nick.
Yes.
You've got Sean with his hand up as well from
sorry,
Fire
Sean.
and Rescue.
Yeah, Sean, please. Sorry, go on.
That's okay, I took it on. Yeah, it was just a general update and everything, just to prompt awareness, really. So from a fire point of view, protection with the opening up, licensing, businesses moving and everything like that, it's just a reminder that our protection teams are really working with care homes and other premises and everything, and if people need advice because of, it's people are making adjustments and everything because of the social distancing. Obviously, we want to make sure we work with people because of less staff and make sure their fire precautions is actually suitable. So we're working on that one. The other one about prevention for us is very much a recovery one as we move towards, I guess, September, as most people do. During this whole COVID, we kind of slowed down a lot of work. We are reopening our community engagement to a degree where we're doing targeted work around prevention for the high risk ones, particularly from partnership referrals at the moment. The aim being that September we kind of start moving back to a bit more normal, whatever new normal would look like. A key bit on that I'm pleased about the conversation, I think is relevant here actually, is that it seems through the community resilience cell or community safety partners and everything, all the way through this whole process, and I'm sure Toby and Lucy may pick up on it later, was the use of vulnerable data. Now we really know our community really well. I think there's some fantastic work being gone on there. We want to carry on moving that to target these vulnerable groups. They're the same groups in nearly all of us. And if I'm aiming for September to start rolling that out in a new way to triage the way we can do this to continue to protect those people, I'm really pleased to see how that will progress, either as part of the COVID, but also as part of then future Northants and everything, because moving forward, we've learned so much. From a response point of view from us, we're pleased. Incident numbers, as you can imagine, were slightly down during this period of time. Road traffic, there wasn't any on the road, so I can claim a reduction in road traffic incidents, but obviously you can see how the road traffic is increased, so we're going to see that make a shift. We saw a positive impact on the opening of tips, so when you can see that we had secondary fires, people were burning stuff because they couldn't actually get it to the tips, we've seen that slightly reduced now. And for us, we have that bit where our whole model is about on-call staff that have primary employment within industry, etc. They're returning back to work, but we're maintaining resilience in that. So it seems like the benefits we've seen at the moment seem to be continuing, which gives us an opportunity to move this forward. So just a general update, really.
That's great. Thanks, Sean. And apologies for not seeing your hand up. Because there's so many of you, it's actually quite hard for me to see on the screen who's got their hand up at any one time. So just pausing briefly, anybody else want to jump in around item 7 or item 6 with a board member update? Okay, thank you. So we can move on then. Thank you, Sean. Item 7, Northamptonshire Health and Care Partnership update. The report is written by Paul White, but the presenter, I think, is Alison Gilbert. Alison, are you with us?
I am Paul. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm Mick, not Paul.
It's okay. I'm sort of masquerading as Joe Watt. We're having technology problems. So I'm Ali Gilbert. I'm the Director of Transformation for the Partnership, standing in for Paul White today. So the paper, we've done a briefing paper on where we've got to with the partnership work, and it gives an overview of the resurrection of the partnership as we're at this point of the pandemic. And it just describes the governance arrangements and the fact we've resurrected a smaller partnership board, and the leadership group is driving forward the integrated care system programme and the resurrection of that programme with the aspiration to become an integrated care system by April 2021. So the paper just gives you a flavour of some of the subcommittees that we've stepped down, the ones that we've kept going, and we in essence we were looking at the whole infrastructure and the functioning of the partnership pre-COVID. So we're now using the lessons learned from COVID to ensure that we have change at pace, and we're embedding that in. Since the paper's been written, we have had engagement with NEDs and chairs and chief executives, and we started to explore a dialogue and put a construct underneath the integrated care system programme so we can move it forward rapidly. I suppose the 2 points to note with that is not just the pace of change and lessons learned, is the connectivity with the unitary programme as well, working with Anna Earnshaw, and the connectivity between the two. So as a recognition, we just need to work through what that means, particularly at a neighbourhood and a place level. So that's all I had to say today. Happy to take any questions in light of the paper. Thank you.
That's great, thank you, Alison. The board is just asked to note the contents of the report, but any questions or comments for Alison and the team? Yes, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. Just the point that Alison mentioned there about the work with Anna, and I think that just serves to highlight the enormity of the task of this process we're going through with local government reform, and it cuts across so many different areas, and the intensity and the work that's going on, coupled up with the response to COVID, is quite incredible, really. And everybody needs to be commended that's working hard on it.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Any others? Yes, Toby, and then Lucy.
Hi, Nick. Apologies for being a few minutes late as well, coming onto the call. Usual technical issues. Just two things I wanted to add to Ali's update. The first is that partners will note that the paper makes reference to NHCP arrangements up to the end of July, to the 31st of July. So just to note that the next meeting of the Health and Care Partnership Board, which will take place a week today on the 16th, we'll be having a discussion about arrangements from August onwards. So that was the first thing to note. And then the second piece is to reference that the Health and Care Partnership has been hugely focused over its last couple of meetings, even through the sort of later stage of this period, on a whole piece of sort of community, in particular, work around the redesign for integrated care across Northamptonshire. ICAN is the kind of programme name that you'll start to hear more referenced, and this is picking up on work around frailty, work around integrated community teams wrapped around primary care networks, and work around the kind of discharge and flow side of things from an acute perspective. So a real intense focus of the Health and Care Partnership in terms of delivery on how do we reset things coming out of COVID-19 in a different way, particularly in terms of those pathways. And that's very much a health and care. Anna, Teresa, local authority partners at district and county level engaged in that work as well as clinicians across the system, Joe Watt, who I know is on the call, and others. So there's a real purposefulness, Nick, that's starting to get put in place behind the Health and Care Partnership Board that says, let's get on and do some things and make some changes happen for patients and local people, at the same time as the kind of stuff in this paper, which is more about some of the governance and architecture of how we run the ICS to achieve all of that. So I think some real positive energy actually coming out of this period in relation to that partnership working, which is all for the good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Toby. I guess maybe we'll look back on this and see it was a crisis that really forced the integration agenda in a more aggressive way than we've perhaps been used to in the past. Lucy, your hand's up.
Hi, so really I just wanted to, I suppose it was, I don't want to repeat what Toby said, but it is about that genuine understanding of what we've achieved during the pandemic and making sure that we capture and build on that as we go into our ICS development. But I'm also reflecting on Sean's comments about the fact that we do need to make sure that we continue to consider our wider public service partners as we talk about our integrated care system. It has been quite focused, and I'm just as guilty of that as everybody else on the more traditional health and care services. But I think that the pandemic has demonstrated just how much we can achieve when we draw in our wider partners. So yeah, it's to kind of build and emphasise on those 2 points.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure that's a theme that will be recurring to our discussions, just when we really hold to the wheel, how fast things can happen that in the past may have taken months or even years are happening in weeks, which is interesting. Any other comments? I can't see any other hands raised. Okay, we can move on then. So Councillor Goldbeam, Matt, it's your chance to update us as you normally do, but perhaps some reference to the children's services as well would be helpful in this context. Matt, over to you.
Unfortunately, Matt's just dropped off the call. Is he back? Or Councillor Morris, will you take over?
It's perfect timing. Yeah, okay. So the next, do you want to go on then, Lucy? Do you want to carry on?
I think Councillor Morris is going to give us a bit of a brief oversight, and hopefully Matt will be able to rejoin.
Yeah, go on, Councillor Morris, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, but he said he's just texted me to say he's he's going to try and get back in. So if we can maybe move on and come back to him, that would probably be a good idea, because he said he's got quite a lot to say and he didn't want to miss the opportunity. So he's trying to get back in now. Okay, that's understandable. It happens often. So let's move to mate, which is the update, the Better Care Fund and the IBCF. I think it's Sharif Osman who's presenting. Sharif, welcome. Sharif, you're muted.
Hi, sorry, apologies. In terms of, I was also a few minutes late due to technical problems, so I apologize for that. This is my first meeting, so I do not know what is. I didn't know what is expected, but I think Sam Fitzgerald used to cover these meetings on behalf of Anna. I was asked to provide an update on frailty and BCF kind of finances. In terms of where we are with the two programs. Toby mentioned ICANN, so frailty is part of the ICANN three-pillar work that is identified in Northamptonshire as part of adult social care and health integration work, and we quite fluid in that. In terms of frailty work, I think members here would have the knowledge, would be aware of the difficulties that this had previously in terms of lack of recruitment, lack of commitment, lack of space in the acutes, but that now with the assistance of all the partners, we have two frailty units, one at NGH and one at KGH. That work is being led for the system by Jo Focus, who is one of the COOs in one of the acutes. She's based at KGH. So we have made some significant progress in terms of frailty because we've got two units up and running, one at KGH, one at NGH, although there is quite a lot of work to go still in that respect. Although we've got health and social care integration working at the front door, we have not defined the key performance indicators or other kind of governance arrangements around that. So that work is ongoing with the assistance of Newton Europe. We've had some kind of challenges, which is a system we're getting together to resolve in terms of how we resource the units, how we come together as in MDTs and things like that, and our links to community work that is being going on with PCNs and also the link to acute work. So the other kind of areas that we're working in here is the acute and communities, which are based in PCNs and other communities. And it's also linked to the work that NAS is doing around our own TOM work. This will give us will give the system quite a number of benefits, including if we're turning around people in the front door, then people are not admitted. So there are quite a number of things about patient outcomes and things like that, but we're working on the KPIs around that. In terms of the BCF kind of thing, as you know, BCF due to COVID was suspended. My paper has got figures of BCF in the first quarter, in the second quarter, and in the third quarter in terms of the detox figures around that. But just to add to that, in terms of there's going to be a review of BCF in terms of the current process, reviewing the BCF with the schemes that are available. So what we need to do is consolidate the schemes into one strategic theme and focus, and then underpin ICS thinking around this, consider potential risk and shared of the outcomes, and incorporate some of the integrated services going forward. So as far as the board is concerned, I would like the board to note the update on the work around frailty, and to also note the Q4 BCF update, and also advise me on the subject that the board wished to be updated on, moving into the future, moving forward, please. That's all I had to say.
Okay, thank you, Sheriff. Any questions on the paper? Joanne, yes.
So not so much a question, but as a comment, just really to lend support with what Ashraf has been saying about the ICANN programme. As somebody who has clinical oversight of the whole programme, I think it is a time where actually everybody is with one mind, that you are only in hospital if you have a reason to reside there. There's been a lot of national work on reason to reside, and essentially you're in hospital because something is being done to you, for you, or with you, and actually everybody else should be somewhere else. And it is something that we've had a huge amount of agreement, momentum, and things are actually starting to happen with it. So it's not the situation of just planning for it. There are things that are really making a difference, and people, by the time we have our next Health and Wellbeing Board, we will actually see things that are really different for our population. So it's a really exciting programme to be part of, and we have different people in different work streams speaking on behalf of the system, and very much primary care involved as an integral part of that within PCNs and MDT work as well. So it is really the first time we've done something quite as integrated as this. So it's an exciting time.
Actually, that's really encouraging, Joe. Thanks for that. I mean, I know that in previous meetings we've sat and sort of perhaps scratched our head slightly about what's going on with the Better Care Fund. It's a fair slice of cash that comes into the county that we do have some level of control over. And so it's really encouraging to know that there are moves to integrate that work much more closely than has been achieved previously. I think that's what I'm hearing. So thank you for that. Any other comments? That's great. So thank you, Ashraf. Let's move on. Matt's still not with us, I don't think. Councillor Golby's still absent. I'm sure he'll join soon. So Ian Vincent, there 10 and 11, Ian, are yours. Future Northants update and the Disabled Facilities Grants Funding report. So Ian, can I hand over to you, please?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Sharon, and good morning to everyone. Okay, an awful lot of work's happened since the last meeting of this board. If you remember, I reported last time that structural change order was in place, the revised one, which still got a go-live date of the 1st of April for the 2 new unitaries. That is still the case, and that's certainly still being worked on. Obviously, we really didn't understand exactly what COVID and the impacts of COVID were going to have on the local authority family at the time of the last meeting, but I would say that we probably lost the 3 months of lockdown in terms of progress on the new programme. Picked it up about a month before the end of the start of the release of lockdown. So we've been going at it now for about 5-6 weeks in real earnest, bearing in mind that a lot of officers are still very heavily involved in the current COVID response, but also will be involved in the recovery and restoration phase as well. So this is putting some real pressure on the availability of staff to get this over the line. However, what I'm really pleased to say is that we're pretty much back on track. So monumental effort by a lot of people to get us there with everything else that's going on. And so much so that by the end of this month, we should have 2 blueprints for the organisational arrangements within the 2 new unitaries. And in August, we will be starting the implementation phase, which again is around about the programme timing we originally anticipated. Obviously, the programme now is much lighter in the sense that we are really focusing on being safe and legal on the 1st of April. So getting all our policies lined up, getting all of the service provision so it doesn't fall over on the 1st of April. And I can report that work is progressing really, really well. And some of the major stuff that are directly impacts on the public, I think will just be a seamless transfer between the current 8 authorities into the 2 new unitaries. So some real positive work going on there. I suppose the biggest piece of work that's been going on probably in the last month or so is disaggregation of county council services and the aggregation of district and borough services. And again, whilst we were looking at a fairly light touch when we reapproached the programme, just so that we got across the line and everything was still working, what I'm pleased to say is that we've actually managed to plan for about an 8% disaggregation from county services and significantly more of that on the aggregation of district and borough services. That means that the solution to the north and west split will be 80 to 90% complete on day one, which is again really, really very helpful for moving forward. I won't steal Matt's thunder on the Children's Trust, but other than to say that whilst all this is going on, that is already also being progressed and will happen ahead of vesting day. More of that, no doubt, when Matt comes on the line. What I would say to everyone is that the Future Northampton's website is up and running, and there is a tremendous amount of information there for anyone who's interested in a specific area of the work. So I'd highly recommend that you have a look at that. So moving forward, I think we're entering quite an exciting phase, because this is the bit where we actually get the practical work done to actually get us across the line. And it's at the moment looking like that will be achievable. We do have a stock take at the end of this month to ensure that what we're not saying is to government in particular that we can do this, when actually there are indicators that suggest we can't. At the moment, that's not the case. We do think we'll get across the 1st of April threshold. I think I'll stop there, Nick. If there's any questions, happy to take them.
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks, Ian. Matt, Councillor Golby is back online now, but not on video, but on the phone. Just to test it, Matt, can you hear us? Hello, Matt.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah. Okay. Did you hear?
Yeah,
Matt,
yeah.
Did you hear Ian's contribution? Because there may be something.
I did.
Come back on.
I did. Yes.
Okay,
no. Do you want me to add on the children's bit and a bit about the trust? I heard Ian reference that there.
Well, actually, it might be better if Ian could carry on and do item 11 briefly, Ian, and then we can go back to you, Matt, for.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. For item 8, and you can perhaps pick up on some of the comments that Ian made about the unitary split. Okay. Thank you. So, Ian, can you update us, please, on the DFG?
Okay, disabled facilities grants. This report is an annual report, and I have to say this is probably the best in the calendar. This is the best Health and Wellbeing Board to put future reports into, because we've got all the figures now for the the last year, which is effectively what we're reporting on. So this is retrospective. You'll see that the total spend on DFGs is just over £4 million, which obviously, given the other comments that have come through today, is a really important positive contributor to moving people out of hospital when they don't actually need to be in hospital. Some of these things are very minor, but nevertheless, it's so significant that it does prevent people going back to their own home. So level access showers, even handrails, and so things like that are actually could be real blockers in some cases. You'll see that the figures are quite good in terms of total spend. My own authority actually tops up this fund that we get from government because we see it as a really important preventative measure. So you can see we actually spent a little more than the grant that was allocated. I think it would be remiss of me to say that the first 3 months of this year have been particularly bad in terms of performance in DFG. We have obviously been hit by contractors who basically shut up shop for a while, suppliers who also shut up shop for a while, and the shielded population, which actually is where a lot of this work is carried out in their homes. That is slowly coming back, but I think we've probably lost a solid 2 months of activity in the first part of this year. The applications are now coming back. People are more relaxed about us going in to their properties to do the survey work, so on and so forth. So I think there'll be a flurry of activity towards the end of this calendar year, but certainly there's been a significant setback in the first quarter of the year. I think we've got some recommendations as well, Chairman. So it's to note the spend for last year. Note that there is a risk that this spend this year will be down on where it should be, but also note that there's likely to be an increase in demand, which may compensate for the slow start. Thanks, Chairman.
It's very clear. Thank you, Ian. Just a couple of questions, and then perhaps we'll open it up because there's some good stuff going on here. But I know that Daventry is the only district council that actually exceeded the spend that was given them by government. All the others have spent less. Is that a timing issue, or is it?
It can be. I mean, some of the schemes that started later in the year would perhaps not have spent anything, but would have had money committed. This actually just talks about spend rather than the commitment.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. And those recommendations as well are interesting. There is a risk, recommendation B, that the district and borough councils not be able to spend or commit the 2021 funding. I mean, does this wrap over into the discussion about unitaries, Ian? Because yep. I guess these will be merged into two groups, or these spends, and then the picture might look a bit different.
I think the practical side of things, when the unitary set out, there will be a similar number. The resource won't grow as a result of the changeover from 8 to 2. But what I think will be should be more apparent, although I think we've already almost cracked this one, is the integration, so that the whole thing will be seamless rather than being dealt with in two tiers. And we get the applications for DFG, the county through social care get their own pressures. Once we're a single unit, or two single units, I should say, I think the coordination could be a little bit smarter. Although I have to say that doesn't appear at the moment to me to be a particularly big problem. I don't think it will speed up. The point is, I don't think the unitary will speed up the delivery rate. I think that will be, it's very much a demand-led service, this one. And so if we get the demand, then we'll do our best to meet the expectations.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Very clear. Any comments or clarifications, queries for Ian on either of those two items, item 10 or 11? Lucy, yes.
So really welcome the report, and obviously as one of the sort of statutory responsibilities of the Health and Wellbeing Board, it's really useful to have that summary of the spend last year. I think I'm just wondering, again, reflecting on the fact that it's a statutory responsibility of the board, whether we might want to write to the source of the Disabled Facilities Grant funds to just ask as a board if there is a possibility, because of the COVID-19 circumstances, for more flexibility around the period of time with which we can spend this year's allocation, because I do recognise the fact that it's a significant risk for us to be able to complete a lot of the work that's required. And if anything, we know that we're going to be discharging and needing to support in the long term a significant number, perhaps more, of people who may need these facilities. So I just wonder if the board would be in agreement for us to write formally to request that flexibility. I'm not quite sure how that would land when it's received, but I think it's maybe something that we could consider.
I think that's a very good suggestion. See lots of people nodding. There's nothing to lose by trying, is there? So I think unless people want to argue against that sort of suggestion from Lucy, we should try that. Ian, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's a good idea. I mean, I think there's a lot of resetting going to go on with government and its grants generally, and in particular the impacts of COVID. So I think it's a very good idea. I think we should just do it.
Okay, good. Let's just do it. So thank you, thanks Ian, and thanks for all the work that your team and others have put into that. It's a good outcome. Matt, you're back with us. Lovely to see you. So can we move back to item 8 on the agenda then, please, Matthew, and then it's over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I've got two sections really. One is a bit of a brief overview on children's services, because that's what my agenda item is, and then I'll talk a little bit about the trust, if that's okay. So going back through COVID, of course, it's been an extremely challenging set of circumstances for all partners on the meeting today, but I'll just give a bit of a summary because I've got some stats and detail here. So there was an inevitable decrease in the number of contacts coming into the social care front door, from the beginning of March. But as we've got back to a little bit more of what's considered normal, those are back now up to the sort of pre-COVID levels, and they're looking to deal with those as well as they can. 19% of the contacts related to domestic violence throughout that COVID period, which was an increase and was expected. And I know the police have worked hard around that, because obviously more people are at home, families been under pressure, etc. Cases in duty and assessment have reduced from 25% from the last pre-COVID week, but I've seen further increase over the last 2 or 3 weeks, back up to what is more of a normal level. Child protection cases have increased by 1 or 2%, and the number of children in care and children in need remain relatively stable. The reduction in face-to-face direct work with families from social care and partner agencies during lockdown will mean more support is likely to be required in the longer term, and will put pressure on services. Children's social care have continued to support families during the lockdown, and face-to-face visits have continued for those higher risk cases, and virtual visits for other cases as well. So in terms of service and planning, a lot of revised procedures and guidance have been developed for virtual visits. That's all been put in place, and that's all been working pretty well and stable. With the recent change in restrictions, guidance has been reviewed for staff to meet with children and families outdoors. So all that has been happening, and visits have tried to take place in as normal circumstances as possible. Senior managers have been developing plans for the restoration of services and planning for potential significant increase in referrals as schools start to open, and they did go up, and this situation has been closely monitored. And of course, schools next week will close down their normal term, but look to reopen. That's, those key worker children will still be having that service, attending school. Recruitment had continued during the COVID period, with vacancies being filled in priority safeguarding and the front door teams, which have always been the difficult parts of the service to recruit to. The new social worker career progression grades have also been implemented, and 23 permanent staff have been successful in being appointed to the new senior social worker roles. Throughout the COVID crisis, some staff have been redeployed to help and support other areas of the service. This has primarily been in the safeguarding teams. There was an outbreak in one of the authorities' children's homes at Arnold House, which did put significant pressure on staff, and it did get picked up in the press, but that has been dealt with and has been managed as well as possible. In terms of foster care recruitment, there has been an impact on foster care recruitment during this time. So there's been a decrease in inquiries being received, which is a natural thing to happen throughout this period. And of course, that does compound pressure. And one of the considerations for unitary around children and adults is around some of the locked-in costs as a result of COVID and how that moves on and acts and puts pressure on, you know, next year and the subsequent years. Community resilience, the Children's Emergency Planning Cell and the School Emergency Planning Cell have worked together to ensure contact is made with children who fall in the shielded category, and that I think Northamptonshire has actually done that pretty well. And we've obviously got contact with the children's commissioners. We've got links into the DFE, and I'm not just saying it, but they're saying that the response from the service in Northamptonshire has been pretty good, as it has been as good as, if not better than, many of our peers up and down the country. And I'll come on to schools. So throughout the period, 96.3% of our schools are open or have made alternative arrangements, and 67% of the special schools are open who have made special arrangements. And there's been a good level of attendance, and the DFE again have been monitoring that. And the Northamptonshire performance is higher than the national average. So that's a positive, I would say. I mentioned the COVID infections at Arnold House, the pressure that put on. Young people and care leavers have been engaged in some of the key worker roles. They've been in supporting things like food collections and distributions, and that has been a very enriching and positive experience for them. Finally, I'll just talk about Ofsted. Ofsted were due to complete a monitoring visit of our children in care services in April, and of course this was postponed, and we heard a couple of weeks ago that Ofsted are re-energising themselves, if you like, and looking to start and come out to authorities that are deemed inadequate, which of course Northamptonshire is, from September. So we await them coming in, which will be a heavier experience than just a sort of focus visit, but not a full-blown inspection. So that, of course, again puts pressure on the service. So we've got to work with the DFE to try and find an appropriate time that Ofsted can come in to get a good evaluation of where we are, which then leads on to the trust. And I did note on the action log, going back from the last meeting, it did say development of the Children's Trust has been put on hold due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as Ian alluded to there, that has moved on considerably. There's been an enormous amount of work gone into the trust. I think there's one of the ambitions of the DFE is not to have the trust and its progression uncoupled. They've used that term from the whole local government reform programme. They see it as something that needs to happen, and I think most of us would agree that that is the right way of looking at it. And as I say, there's an enormous amount of work going on. We've got the senior roles being recruited to. There's interim. There's a permanent chair recruited to, Ian Currier, and there's James Thomas was the previous interim CEO. He's now left, but there's another one in place. The NEDs are being recruited, and it's all moving on. And the ambition is to try and make the trust go live by the end of this year. There are certain considerations to take around things like IT and the ERP system, which is a massive challenge to enable the trust to go live, and then move in and enable the rest of the local government reform programme to go live. But as far as the trust is concerned, there's an enormous amount of energy and work going on. There's a lot of people working on it, and hopefully it will go live by the end of this year. So if that's my update, I think, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Golby. I think there's, just to reinforce that last point, I'm really impressed with the amount of work that's gone on with the trust. You know, despite COVID, it's really motored forward, which is great. And I've met Ian. I think a few of us around the virtual table here have met Ian Currier, and were involved in the interview process. So we're looking forward. Has he started yet? And will he be on this board?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. In terms of him being on the board, he has started. He's been in post for about a month or so now. And so is the previous interim CEO, and I have to say he did add a lot of value. Their experience has added a lot of value to the department's response through the whole COVID challenge as well. But yeah, that's a good question about the role of the trust on this board, and something that needs to be given some thought.
Okay, maybe we could take that offline then with Cheryl and find out what the if there's some bureaucratic reason he couldn't be, but I think he would add value given the importance of that agenda item. We've got some Councillor Golby, we've got some questions coming through. I think David Jones first, please, and then to Toby.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, I don't know why my video has stopped on my laptop, but I've been listening and can hear clearly. Thanks, Matt, for that report. Just quickly to say, Ian Currier met the Health Watch board yesterday in a virtual meeting. Went on longer than the half hour we'd allocated. He's definitely enthusiastic, and I think the board was encouraged by the vision that he set. But just to flag up that the big issue is to shift the budget and to shift the activity towards more support for families and taking fewer children into care. And that is not a small task. It is a major task, and you have to have investment to succeed. And we will be watching very carefully to see how that process follows through. So it takes time to put in family support and then to reduce the number of children in care. And you can't just whip children out of care overnight. Once they're there, by and large, they need to be supported. This is just to flag up that Health Watch is very encouraged by the direction of travel, but we see the need for investment. And that is a big challenge for the new unitaries, but it cannot be ducked, and we will be watching carefully what happens. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David. Comments noted. Toby.
Thank you, Nick. Really building on some of David's comments, actually, I had the opportunity last week to meet Ian Currier, likewise really encouraged in terms of his vision and enthusiasm for commitment to moving things forwards and improving things across the county. We did have a conversation around the potential opportunities for Ian and the Chief Exec to engage in different forums across the county. And so I think there's something there for us to pick up, both in terms of Health and Wellbeing Board, but also other fora like NHCP in terms of the partnership board as well. And I did emphasise to Ian that the rest of the system is very enthusiastic and keen to get engaged and involved in that broader children's agenda across the county. I think many of us as partners on this forum and others recognise there's rightly been a very intense internal focus within NCC on addressing some of those issues that have led to some of the changes that Matt's described and quantified for us. But I think the next phase of this journey has to be about how we broaden that conversation into more of a multi-agency discussion. And I was really optimistic that Ian was very much up for those opportunities. So I think there's a scope there, Nick, for you in this chair capacity, for us with Paul in his NHCP chair capacity, to just look at where it's appropriate to place sort of chairs and chief execs into those roles going forwards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Toby. Councillor Golby, any comments on Ian Vincent's future Northampton update? Ian was pretty comprehensive, but is there anything you wanted to add? Because I'm conscious you were offline when.
Yeah, I didn't hear all of that, other than to just go back to that point I made right at the beginning, that there's an enormous amount of work going on. There's obviously, we've got a timeline and a target to reach, as we have with the Children's Trust. And if you look at everything that's going on in Northamptonshire, aside from the system response to COVID, it is quite incredible to try and quantify and get your head around the amount of work that's going on. But I think we're in a decent place. We had a meeting yesterday. MHCLG were on the call, and they speak of how generally impressed and how high regard they consider the whole project team and how things are progressing. So I think we've all, well, the county council, the districts and boroughs, we've worked really, really well together. We've come an awful long way in a quite a short space of time. So yeah, positive.
Okay, thank you. Toby, your hand's up. Is that a legacy? It's a legacy hand. We've all suffered. Any other questions for Councillor Golby? Matt, what we do, we'll take offline maybe the discussion about whether there should be representation on the board through from the chair, the new chair of the trust.
Yeah,
yep.
Sure.
Okay,
And just on David's point, he's spot on. Of course, we need better outcomes, and we've got to make sure the investment's there. But finance is of course, as ever in local government for all of us, a massive pressure. So we want the outcomes that for the best, for all of our children and residents in the county, coupled against the sort of pressures we're all dealing with. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, but it does sound very positive, more than it sounded for a while. So thank you for everybody who's involved in that process. Let's move on then. So item 12, annual statutory report. This is the Northamptonshire Health Wellbeing Board annual report 2019-2020. You've got it there in your pack. Most of those things should be familiar with you. I'm assuming that you've had a chance to read prior to this meeting. And what we're seeking is endorsement from the board for presentation to the Northamptonshire County Council full council in September 2020. Hopefully there's no surprises in the report. It's pretty factual what's kind of happened despite COVID. Work's still going on behind the scenes, and the strategy is unfolding nicely. If you're happy as a board to recommend that document to go to a full council in September. Okay, thumbs up. Thank you, Councillor Morris is saying yes. Thank you, David. Yep, okay, virtual hands or real ones, great. Thank you very much. Right, so let's move on then. Item 13, we go into the strategic areas now. Sorry, there's somebody. Oh, Lucy. Sorry, Lucy.
So there was a comment from me, but there was Dr. Watt also put her hand up as well. So should we go to Dr. Watt first?
Sorry.
So yeah, it was just a very brief comment. Obviously, one of the things that I do within this board is the representation for the part of our county that is under Cambridge and Peterborough CCG. So I have an arrangement with Gary that obviously we make sure that part of East Northampton, the population represented, that their concerns are brought into this committee. I'm just mindful that they're not referenced. I don't know whether we need to reference them, but it just seemed relevant just to ask the question about that population in East Northampton.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I'm not quite sure what the answer is like.
Shall I answer that as well as then
please.
sort of make the, so yeah, absolutely. We do need to remember that the obviously the council represents a slightly different population to the CCG, and therefore you do represent Peterborough and Cambridgeshire CCG on behalf of the residents of a section of East Northamptonshire. So I'll pick that up with Cheryl and make sure that that is referenced as one of the roles that you fulfill, Dr. Watt, so thank you for that. The other thing really was just to say it's nice just to be able to take a second and reflect on the fact that despite what's been a very challenging year in Northamptonshire, because there is so much change happening, and obviously the pandemic has also made a very complex picture more complex. I want to say thank you to Cheryl for managing to work with all the health and wellbeing fora, and obviously reflect on the work that's been undertaken and completed by the Health and Wellbeing Board over the last year. I think she's done a really good job of pulling that together and summarising it. I think the other thing obviously is, again, playing into the conversations about the development of the unitary authorities and also the ICSs, is how we continue to use those health and wellbeing fora, who with some funding from public health and support from the Health and Wellbeing Board have been able to really invest in some grassroots community-based programmes to improve the population's health locally. So it's really important that we take the lessons learned from that approach into the development of our ICS neighbourhoods and place-based working. But thank you very much again to Cheryl for summarising so beautifully a year's work.
We'll all support that. Thank you, Cheryl, on behalf of the board for your work on this. In terms of reference to the Peterborough and Cambridgeshire CCG, is that a big revision? And it needs to be in there, obviously, but that's something we can do before the September deadline, I'm sure. Yeah. Okay. So, Cheryl, would you be able to take that offline as well?
Yes, I'll add some in. Is the board happy to delegate approval with that admission to Nick rather than coming back to the board in September? Yeah. Okay.
It would just be, I guess, I don't know, a small amendment, a few paragraphs perhaps, but absolutely right to raise it. And apologies for rushing ahead of myself. Any other questions before we move on to item 13 on this report? I think we've probably covered it all now. Okay, right then. So item 13, COVID-19 update. Consider how the board can feed into health protection and local engagement boards. A verbal presentation. It's Lucy and it's Toby.
Toby, shall I start and then you add? Are you happy to do it that way around? Yeah, perfect. So I'm sure people are fully aware and all have very different and varied experiences of the current pandemic. People who are attending the strategic coordinating group obviously receive data on a daily basis to help us make operational decisions to manage the current pandemic and obviously plan for reset and recovery, which is a phase we're obviously starting to move into. People will know, I'm sure, from the national data that locally we've completed over 30,000 tests on our local residents. We've identified and managed over 3,000 cases of COVID-19, and very sadly we've experienced 677 deaths. So, you know, it is a significant virus. It continues to be a significant threat in our county, and so we need to remain alert. And we continue to work on a new plan that was published at the end of June, which continues to be refined as guidance, etc., changes on a daily basis around how we intend to prevent and manage outbreaks of COVID-19 going forward. So part of the development of that plan and the requirement of the County Council is to create a health protection board that is COVID-19 specific, and we have a number of subject matter experts from borough and district level, Public Health England, my public health team, and various partners who support that board that's now been running for a number of weeks and has taken over a lot of the work that was being done at the sort of SCG meeting. So we've now created a sort of a group of subject matter experts to take that very responsive and reactive pandemic management purpose forward. That allows obviously the SCG to focus on more strategic work. And alongside that, yesterday was the inaugural meeting of the Local Oversight and Engagement Board, that is the political and public-facing representation that will support the development and delivery of the plan that I mentioned. Part of our challenge nationally, but also locally, has been the fact that the data that we've been receiving around our cases hasn't provided the level of detail we would want in order to respond to local specific cases and or emerging outbreaks. I'm pleased to say that we're now getting data at a lower super output area, and we are just at the moment making sure that we're working through the appropriate data sharing agreements to provide a format to the public that enables them to understand at a more granular level what's happening around COVID-19 in Northamptonshire, but also to twin that with very clear messaging about what the actions that we're asking of our residents therefore are. We do require, obviously, significant support from our media colleagues, both internally, but also media in the sense of public media, newspapers, radio, etc., to help us support that proactive and positive messaging to make sure that people are not, concerned unduly by what will be a new level of information being put out into the community. And people are supported to understand, as I said, the actions that they need to take, dependent on the level of circulating COVID in any one area. So we've been trying to have proactive conversations with media colleagues to ensure that we move from a reporting process that I think sometimes can be quite worrying from a public perspective into a space that is really clear about the actions that people should be taking to help the public make informed decisions about risk mitigation, and to make sure that obviously we build trust in the fact that we have a really robust system locally to manage and to respond to any potential outbreak situations. We've been working, as I said, with its borough and district colleagues, and our environmental health officers at borough and district level have been key to the development of this plan. And I just wanted to say thank you to them and our Public Health England colleagues for their support in developing the plan and for their ongoing support in our daily sit-rep meetings, which are now happening to help us look at the data on a daily basis and develop those communications that are going to be so key with the public. And again, the council have also had a number of cells, as have NHS colleagues, but one in particular that I think is coming into its own at the moment is the Safer Spaces Task Force, Safer Public Spaces Task Force. So they've been helping us provide signage and information to the public to help the economy reopen in a safe and appropriate way. So people will have seen a lot of the signage on walkways and outside shops, etc. And it's key to making sure, again, that we communicate key messaging and make sure that our public remain vigilant as things sort of reset and restart. So that's the work, and that's the summary up to date, but I'm sure Toby will want to add more to that.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. Toby.
Thanks, Lucy, and thanks, Nick. That was a very comprehensive update from Lucy. There were just 2 points I was going to add to that, if I may. The first of them, really to reinforce Lucy's point that we're a long way from out of this yet, and notwithstanding the significant changes to lockdown arrangements and the easing of that over recent weeks. And I think the phase that we're moving into is going to be a much more nuanced, locally targeted phase in terms of our understanding around the position across different parts of the county. I really welcome the data that we now have access to locally that gives us that insight, and that Lucy and her public health team and analysts are able to look at that down to a very detailed level. I think the new role of the Oversight and Engagement Board that I know Councillor Morris, who's on this meeting as well, chaired yesterday, I think is critical in that. And personally, I am very supportive from an NHS perspective of us being able to share much more detailed local level data to enable our population to understand the differing position, as it will vary across different parts of the county at any one point in time. And I think that's going to be much more powerful actually going forward than some of the generic messaging at a kind of national perspective that we've all heard over so many months, but I suspect some of our populations perhaps become a little bit immune to, and I think this will give a much more local nuanced flavour to that. So that was the first thing, Chair, just to say we're still very much in this, but it's going to be a different phase moving forwards. The second thing to say, and particularly from a health and care perspective, is that the impact and legacy of the last 3-4 months is absolutely one which we're now working in terms of restoration of services. And there's an equally important message here, particularly from a public perspective, about people continuing to access and come forward for services when they need them. We know we've seen a real drop off in terms of levels of presentation and case activity around strokes, around cancers, around heart attacks. And yet we know those things will have continued. You know, those things don't pause, unfortunately, for coronavirus or anything else. And therefore, there's a major focus on particularly our primary care teams, our acute teams, our community teams, really focused on how we can encourage and make it safe and make people feel safe to come back and present back into services. So we've kind of got these two twin messages at the same time, which are not easy to balance and manage. But I think partners on this call and involved in the Health and Wellbeing Board all have a role to help to play in reinforcing and helping to relay some of those key messages. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Toby. And one of the questions we need to consider, if we can, as a board, is how we feed in as a board to the health protection and local engagement boards. I think I'm right in saying that, Lucy and Toby. So perhaps we can open up the discussion about how we might be able to help with those. Just a question in my mind: the health protection and local engagement boards. When will these be set up? Do they exist already?
Yep, so the COVID-specific health protection board, because we have a health protection board that runs as business as usual, but one that is specific to COVID has been, it's met 4 or 5 times now, so it runs for sort of 5-6 weeks. That meets on a weekly basis, and it reviews all of the data, and as I said, it has a group of subject matter experts around the table who then obviously make sure that each of the local outbreaks and or local issues are being followed up. As I said, it will be complemented by a complete communications plan. And as I said, we've got that more nuanced data, as Toby quite rightly says, we'll be able to target our messaging so that people are really clear about what level of risk they have in the area that they live or work in. So it will be a very different method of communication with the public. The lead local oversight and engagement board, as I said, met for the first time yesterday. And there is a significant overlap actually in the membership of this board and that board, but I'm more than happy for you to be part of that membership as well, if you would so wish to.
Okay, thanks, Lucy. I guess the question for us as a board is, what value can we add to those? And you know, there's no point prolonging the discussion probably if a number of in front of me virtually are part of those two new boards, which is good. I mean, the timings don't work so well for us as a board of Health and Wellbeing Board, because of course there's months before we meet where you guys got to do things in the here and now, you know. So there's probably limited value we can add other than just endorsing what's happening and receiving reports as and when. Maybe the same question would apply to the healthcare partnership. How would they be involved as well? Do you have any thoughts on that, Lucy or Toby?
Nick, if I may, just to give, I could echo Lucy's comment. There's as with a number of our forums across the county in this kind of space, there is quite a lot of commonality between membership of this forum and others as well. So looking down the list, I can see a number of colleagues, including the chair of the Oversight Board, as I've already mentioned in terms of Ian, who are on this call, Lucy, myself, the acute trusts and community trusts and the districts and boroughs all have input into that forum as well. So I think for me, it's probably more about taking the opportunity, as we have done today when we meet, to say what's current, where are we at the moment, and are there particular asks that perhaps are more likely to flow the other way, Nick, into this room, to say, are there things other partners involved in this call who aren't directly engaged in that? A, would be helpfully cited on, and B, might be able to help to reinforce and help to sort of particularly communicate some of those messages. And so I think what we might look to do, I might suggest, Lucy, going forward, is when we have Health and Wellbeing Board meetings, is to just bring a current latest position into this forum. And it's more the kind of cascade that way that says, how can other partners help to support and reinforce the work that's taking place through that route? Yeah,
I think that sounds entirely sensible. Let's make sure that happens. We've got David, your hand is up. David Jones.
Thank you. Yes, apologies, my video isn't working. One or two quick points, and I'm conscious I say things here because I'm not in many of the other forums, so it's an opportunity to comment. First of all, I think from Health Watch Northamptonshire would like to recognise the transformation in partnership working that has happened. It isn't only due to COVID, but it's I've seen over the last year or more, it's reflected in the annual report, Nick, but we've seen a transformation, and that is because of commitment of leaders. We need to make sure it cascades through, but certainly Health Watch is happy to acknowledge that and recognise that it's a really significant change. Matt sort of alluded to it in his report on the progress with all the local government reform as well. That's first point. Secondly, there are some issues of concern, and this is a personal point which I have to make here, and I'm conscious this is a public forum. But the local area has not been helped by the national messaging and the transparent political posturing which has happened. I know this is not a political meeting, but all of us in Health Watch Board have different perspectives. I'm not giving a unified position, but it really has been confusing, and it's really disappointing, that national leadership. And it's good to see there's a contrast locally in how we've worked more effectively to deal with that. There are some issues still around care homes. I'm pleased that the ethics group has discussed the care homes position, but we've known right back in February, Sage commented on transmission in care homes, and there are all sorts of complications. It's such a diverse sector, but this remains an issue which needs to be addressed, and Health Watch, it came up in our board meeting yesterday. Independently, we need to watch that, and pleased to hear about the local messaging. I think people are just relieved to be out in the park. I live near Abington Park, and it was rammed, as the press have covered, and it's very difficult, but to keep those messages going, because it is absolutely clear, and the Health Watch Board was very clear that this is not over by any means, and indeed it may get more difficult as we go into the winter and flu comes as well. But my main point is to thank colleagues for the joint work that has happened across the sector, and I hope we can build on that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, David. Maria, your hand is up.
Yeah, hi. Firstly, I just wanted to say thanks very much for the update from Toby and Lucy. Is really helpful. And I was at the Health and Care Partnership Neds and Chairs meeting this week as well, where we heard what really good work's been going on across the system from all partners. So that's been really impressive, and just want to reiterate thanks for the hard work everyone's done. Going on to the role of this board, which was, I think, part of the question you were asking, is this board's got a focus on health inequalities, and I'm interested to hear Lucy's perspective on what kind of information will be able to come maybe to the next meeting of this board around the inequalities impact of COVID and what we're doing to address that issue.
Okay.
Thank you, Maria.
So, yes, Lucy, please.
So the public health team, it's already been mentioned, we've done a couple of things. We've set up an ethics advisory group, and that obviously has had questions posed to it by partners, and it obviously looks at the evidence, it works against an ethical framework, and then provides advice for decision making. And some of that has been about sort of restarting of services and the impact that COVID has had, and the inequitable impact COVID has had on certain groups of our population. That prompted the public health team, as part of the ethics advisory group work, creating an equality impact assessment framework for COVID-19, which is available on the Northamptonshire County Council website. It's not designed at all to be a comprehensive inequalities assessment of COVID for the county. What it is designed to be, as I said, is a framework, so other organisations can look at the groups of people that we've identified may be inequitably impacted by COVID, either during the pandemic itself or in significantly in the longer term during reset and recovery. So I'd encourage people to use that, and we will continue to use that and look at those different groups, and it's reflected in our draft common strategy for the outbreak prevention and control plan, but how we speak to different groups of the population, not just around the geography, because obviously some of the outbreaks will be geographically based, but also to tailor those messages so they're accessible in different languages, that they're accessible in different media formats, so that we are reaching out as best possible using different community leaders to make sure that people do understand the messaging as it's nuanced going forward. David's quite right, we're heading into winter. Winter is always a really challenging time, and again there will be some complexity around the mixed messages for flu and winter planning versus what potentially will be an ongoing pandemic situation. So comms are going to be really key, and making sure that our hard to reach groups are aware of the risk in their area, their setting, their community, and what actions they need to take is certainly writ large through the communications plan. So I want to assure you that we are addressing it, and that we are making sure that we're stakeholder mapping so that we can identify the most appropriate routes for those communications to be delivered.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. David, is your hand still up? David Jones? If not, Sharon's come through on the Zoom chat group. Sharon, this might refer to a previous agenda item, but Sharon says there's someone putting together all the government help into a Northants pack. Also energy grants or finance bills to help with well-being, etc. Sharon, did you want to expand on that briefly?
Right, sorry about that. Unmute is not that easy. Well, there's obviously yesterday a huge announcement made, a lot of money, green money for green services, apprenticeships, etc. And it would be sad if Northamptonshire didn't get a portion of this money that's going out, and it was well managed so that we saw some sort of positive outcome of that funding. And it just concerns me that it's come out so quickly, that who in the county would take the role of doing that. And if there is something that could be pulled together in a leaflet, perhaps two leaflets, one for the grants, etc., and the grants for green energy, etc., and one for the apprenticeship sort of funding. If we could collate something, I mean, I'd be happy to ask practices to put those leaflets into their surgeries and to try and get this stuff out so that local people knew about them and knew how to access them. I was just wondering if that was something mindful of people. That's a practical step that we could take very quickly. Northamptonshire unemployment was very, very good. We'd like to obviously keep that at that level, and to engage with maybe the business sector, the Northamptonshire Commerce to see whether we can't work with them with apprenticeships and with local firms and try and do something locally, because I think that would help people's well-being. The sooner we get them all back to work, and you know, I think mentally and health-wise, that would be a good thing to try and do with this board. I'm not sure if it's your remit or whose remit it would be. Certainly, primary care would like to, you know, try and communicate that information out to patients. That's all really I've got to say.
Okay, there's a challenge from Sharon. I'm not sure whether it's fully this board's remit, but of course the longer term consequences of lockdown, unemployment, etc., do have mental health issues which spill over absolutely into the remit longer term of this board. Lucy and Toby have their hands up. Lucy, please.
So just to reassure Sharon, there's a number of cells that still exist as part of the SDG structure, and there is an economic impact cell which picks up things around communicating with local businesses about what new guidance is coming out, and there is a daily update that goes out to partners around the new guidance. What I can do is ask Kerry Purnell, who heads up the sort of community resilience and is linked into the economic impact cell, to help, you know, look at how we might be able to summarise that if you feel the public would be interested, particularly in some of the newer developments, so that we could create a format that would be useful for distribution to patients, if you're happy for me to put her in contact with you.
Okay, I think that's a yes, thank you. Yes, Toby.
Yeah, I was going to give a very similar answer to Lucy. I wasn't sure which one of us would put a hand up first, but just to build slightly on that, again, going back to the fact we are still in a kind of incident response mode here, we still have a strategic coordinating group, which is a multi-agency group of sort of gold level sort of senior officers across all agencies, local authorities, health, police. That's meeting today. By coincidence, it's got its weekly meeting later on today. And each time we meet, we look at latest guidance and new announcements that have come out, and then route those through appropriate bits of our arrangements. Lucy's pointed to the right point here in terms of the economic and the business sales side of things. So we'll pick that up today, Sharon. And I think your offer as well of help and support through the practice network to communicate and disseminate any messages that come from that's a welcome one. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Toby. Any more comments on that item 13, how the board can feed into the health protection and local engagement boards? I think we've covered it pretty well, and there's great representation around the table anyway. Just a final comment from me actually about the granularity of the data. I think that's really important. If you look what happened to Leicester, what isn't happening in Leicester, clearly it's a national versus local issue. And I think the more we can get strong communications out, and I appreciate what Lucy's saying and Toby's saying around incidences of fatalities in particular, but also transmission rates in Northamptonshire. They're going to be really critical, aren't they? Getting messages right, which are nuanced. That we've done some work, as Lucy knows, a bit of work already on death rates per 100,000 across the county in public health workers and researchers in the university. And there is if you take the future unitary structure, there is a difference in death rate. It's about 8%. It's small. It's probably irrelevant, but it's something that could cause a bit of excitement, because people might start saying, well, why is it different in one area than the other? It's because basically it's because of Northampton as a centre of gravity in one of the in the west of the unitary. You know, you can imagine people getting quite exercised about why there is a difference when actually it's just a statistical artifact. So communicating that to people and journalists, I think, is going to be really important, Lucy and Toby. And if you need resource and help, I think, on the comms side, then perhaps together we can come up with a plan that will allow you to get strong messages out which are crystal clear without worrying people unduly. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you very much. Item 14 then, Lucy, it's you. Again, Northamptonshire Health and Care Wellbeing Plan update.
Thank you. It's a very short update, in as much as Toby's already alluded to a lot of the particularly strategic planning, and also Ali mentioned earlier the ICS planning, etc., has been put on hold nationally. We're starting to restart that work because it needs to be dovetailed into our local reset and recovery. However, at the moment, NHSE planning guidance, both the long-term plan and also the annual planning guidance, has still been paused. So the plan continues to exist in draft, and as and when we have further guidance in relation to the next steps from an NHS England improvement perspective, we will reflect on the position that plan had got to, what has changed in the last few months, and then obviously amend and update partners as appropriate. But we await further guidance at this point.
That's great. Thank you, Lucy. Any comments on item 14? Okay, I think that's a no. Thank you, Lucy. We can move on then to item 15 with the social prescribing update. Stuart Mallet. Stuart, welcome.
Hi, you can hear me, hopefully. Someone, yeah. So I've submitted an update paper, which hopefully members have had a chance to look at. So I'll just give you a brief update of where we've got to with social prescribing in Northamptonshire, and then open it up to discussion, questions, anything. We've obviously got social prescribing link workers who are employed across our 16 primary care networks, and the aim in all the work that we're doing around social prescribing is to complement and build on that current working capacity. We have recently received, in principle, approval of an NHSE grant of £130,000, which was based around a proposal that we submitted from the CCG to develop personalisation supported self-management and digitise social prescribing in a post-COVID-19 environment. Across, we've specified the starting point across it's kind of a place-based approach across the NN2 and N5 postcodes, which are believed via NHFT that it's an area that contains a common profile for learning across how we might be able to scale that across the rest of Northamptonshire's population. And it's also an area where the Northamptonshire Adult Social Services testing open door social care access. So we were thinking of working in that area and then using the learning from that to scale across the rest of the county. In developing that proposal, we worked with GPA, General Practice Alliance, with Northamptonshire Carers, Age UK and NHFT itself. So it's a sort of across the system proposal. The funding is expected from that at the end of this month. So we ought to be able to mobilise some of that work quite rapidly. The social prescribing at scale programme, which is about building support infrastructure in the county and particularly supporting VCSE development to complement the work being done by the PCN social prescribing link workers. Long-term investment for that was approved by the Northamptonshire system by NCC Cabinet and CCG governing body back in December, and the 3.57 million outcome grant from the Life Chances Fund was approved, and that funding comes to the county through the period to March 2025. We've been working on a social outcomes contract to get that started. We need a social outcomes contract between the CCG and our social investor partner, who is Bridges Outcomes Partnership, to actually get that work mobilised. Unfortunately, with COVID-19, that work was paused, but we've now restarted that. We've already established, prior to COVID-19, a social enterprise in the county that will carry out the mobilisation and management work. That's an organisation called Spring. And we've also already selected delivery partners to actually get the social prescribing activity mobilised. And the 4 delivery partners in the county are Age UK, General Practice Alliance, Northamptonshire Carers and Mayday Trust. And recently we've put in a further expression of interest to the LCF, working with Northamptonshire Healthcare Foundation Trust to extend social prescribing work in the area of personalised psychosocial support, which is really about recognising the psychological impact of COVID-19 on the Northamptonshire public, and particularly those with pre-existing long-term conditions. So this is looking, again, it's an expression of interest stage. It's been relatively favourably received at the moment, and it will be looking to gain a further £1 million in outcome grants to the same period as the long-term piece of work. And that's kind of the update. I was happy to then have a discussion.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. That's a great update, and it's good to see the project moving ahead in the way it is. Any comments for Stuart on this? Lucy?
Hi, thank you, Stuart. Obviously, we continue to work closely together on this, but I just wanted to say thank you for obviously continuing to explore opportunities, and obviously the additional opportunity with NHFT is exciting, and we know that coming out of COVID, there will be significant psychological impact that will potentially be lasting. And so I think a focus on that psychosocial support, even if it's just an expression of interest stage at this moment, it is really laudable. So thank you for that, and thank you to NHFT for supporting that as well. It's good to see the system be so agile and responsive to need. With regard to the social prescribing at scale programme, obviously, like many things, the contractual development for that has been put on hold, pretty much on request by NHS England. And I know that the CCG in particular, amongst other partners, are having to obviously reconsider where they are from a point of view of restarting all of those contractual development processes. I know we're really keen to make sure that everything's aligned, but there is a significant challenge around finance, and we will need to wait to see what the CCG financial allocation is indeed as we go forward, because COVID has had such an impact. So I'm really keen that obviously we continue as a board to support the development of that outcomes framework and that contractual support mechanism required. But I do know that obviously we're still awaiting CCG allocation information. So keen as we are to get going, and I know you and I would start this tomorrow, as I'm sure Toby would support, we do need to recognise that until we're clear about the financial allocation for the system, it's difficult to put a firm timeline on the actual mobilisation of that larger programme. But I know the commitment remains.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lucy. Toby, yes.
Thanks, Nick. Just want to really reinforce that commitment does absolutely remain. If there's anything or one thing that the last 3 months or so was shown to us, the kind of contribution of the wider voluntary community sector response coming together with health and local authority, particularly if you look at the way the hubs locally have responded to providing support to the shielded population, to people who've been at homes, that is just such a massive mobilisation of that effort. And it's that kind of broader non-medicalised model that this is always being about, and how do we get that in place at scale. So absolutely the kind of commitment and the direction fully there. Two sort of very practical points, both Stuart and Lucy made reference to it. We have now stepped back up again the work on progressing the contractual side of this, and in particular looking at two areas that were work in progress when we went into COVID and things were stepped down for a period of time. The first is those around the kind of information governance arrangements, the data sharing, to make sure that with the partners we're working with, we've got that all appropriately established. The second in terms of the key performance indicators, so that we're very clear what we're measuring and tracking as part of that contractual arrangement. So that bit of work has been stepped back up. But the third piece of the jigsaw is that piece which Lucy has made reference to. The clinical commissioning groups back earlier this year did rightly sign off the business case for this and seek for that to move forward. The world has changed, our context has changed over the last 4 months very clearly. The financial framework for the NHS has very much been put into a different set of arrangements over the last 4 or 5 months, and we're still waiting to see what that looks like going forward for the rest of this year and beyond. And in particular, that does mean, as Lucy's made reference, we don't have clear allocation information the way that we normally would at this time of year in terms of what that overall budget will look like. So there will need to be kind of a sense check and a loop back through again before we complete the work on contract and get to signature. And for that reason, the paper does make reference to the particular date and that kind of aspirational date of September. If we get there, brilliant, but I suspect the timelines around particularly some of the national financial arrangements may mean it's a bit the other side of that. But I wanted to say to all partners on this call, our commitment is absolutely there. We see the value of this. That hasn't changed. We need to find a way through it. The timelines and navigating that alongside some of the national arrangements will probably be the complexity here, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Thank you, Toby. I mean, sometimes we see it ourselves in our lives outside of the Health and Wellbeing Board, there's a tendency during times of crisis to crowd out the future. We can't afford to do that. This is a real innovation for the county. It's going to cost a bit of money, you've alluded to that, but I think the longer term, generally cash savings, but also improvements to health and well-being are really worth persevering with. So thank you. I think this is an important innovation, and it's looking good. It's going in the right direction. Let's keep an eye on the future, not just focus exclusively on the present. Any other comments? Your hand's still there, Toby. It's down. Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Lucy, for those two contributions, and Toby. We're coming to the end now. Item 16, is any other business? Scanning the faces, looking for hands. No, there's someone touching her nose, Becky, but that's not a hand up, I don't think. Well, okay, thank you very much. I think we can want to close the meeting. Take home messages, just very, very briefly for me. I think it's hugely encouraging to hear the progress that appears to be taking place on all fronts. The DFG, the Better Care Fund, Children's Services, the new governance structure across the county. So thank you, everybody, for all of the input that you're putting into these efforts. Despite the awful consequences of COVID, the pandemic, if anything, is acting as a catalyst for change. And I think this meeting suggests that that change will only be good longer term for all of us, despite the awful consequences. So thank you very much. So the next meeting is on Thursday, the 24th of September, 2020. Will be conducted virtually if social distancing measures are still in place. That's what it says here. Thank you, Cheryl. I don't know about you guys and your life of work, but we're at the university going to move much more to our online virtual meetings anyway, irrespective of social distancing. So I imagine this will become much more of the norm as we move forward. Anyway, stay safe, everybody, and we'll meet up either virtually or face-to-face or some combination thereof in September. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.